All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Adam here with me. I'm super excited to have this conversation. He probably knows more about more things than most people I've had on the podcast. So
Oh,
thanks so much for doing this.
oh, cool. And bang, bang to your back. That's awesome.
Let's get into your background. Maybe give us an
Sure.
overview of kind of how we get to you today, running a family office and building
Yeah.
companies so people understand your perspective.
Well, and let me clarify, I don't run a family office. I run my own family office, which and there's quite a difference between the two. Um, I have all my own capacity. I do lease other people's capacity, another family office capacity. And I am a part of the syndicate because there is benefits to having our own kind of angel list operation, as well as back office. Um, as well as collaborating on certain things, which is great. Family offices these days are a little bit different than they used to be because they've had to take in a lot of outside money. So that kind of constrains them in more philosophically. It'll kind of give a deviation to what one person wants to do with their money is now you have to kind of reach a consensus and making money is not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. So I'll give you a little bit of my own background. Um, so let me go backwards and I'll give you my own history. I came out of Wall Street. Wall Street was much more approachable than it is now. The big people were much more accessible. I mean, you could just give them a call out of the blue. And that is what I did. I'm a very firm believer in cold call. It optimizes the path from A to Z. I cold called my way into several firms, many of which didn't have interest in me, which was fine. I wasn't particularly insulted by that. And everybody was very kind, telling me why they didn't have interest in me. So I wound up meeting with, I wound up really having a great relationship with two analysts from different firms. Uh, One of them was a Goldman Sachs, and he was essentially the analyst that discovered Microsoft, Novell, Lotus Suite, and the other one essentially discovered Micron and the semiconductor side of it. I went the semiconductor side of it. I did very well by accident. I was just very lucky, the right person at the right time, and I had the right gifts. My mentor there quit, so I had to become smart very quickly. And I had the largest position in Micron, VLSI, and a whole bunch of other things, which put a lot of risk on their plate. So I started my own shop. I started a research shop. And 2 years later, I knew I was going to sell it. And 2 years later, I sold it. Silicon Alley was just beginning, which is in Manhattan, was just beginning, and About.com and Tripod. They called it Internet 1.0. I invested in a lot of those companies, and many of them got acquired. And so I decided to create a family office syndicate. So I took my own family office, which I had just built, uh, and decided to create a syndicate. And it just I knew it was going to be super successful. So we just kept on building up the family office syndicate. And initially I brought in a lot of overseas money. So made a couple of small investments. Personally, I think I gave a bunch of people $50,000 just to speculate. I learned that I don't really like people. I like companies. There's a big difference. People bullshit. Companies don't. So now I've got my family office. And a lot of our investment thesis now is what goes forward. I have, I've had a large position in Tesla since the very early days. I've had a large position in Facebook since the very early days. And that started off just opportunistically when the stock went down to 18. Jumping to now, about 3 years ago, I started investing in defense industry companies. There's a lot of reasons for it, but a lot of my thesis is the world's just going to go to war. Um, and
And I guess, Adam, one of the things that's really interesting to me is you come out of a world that I'll describe as kind of Wall Street heavy, right? In terms of very finance driven, very
yeah,
much kind of public markets.
yeah,
But you found a lot of success in investing in these private companies in more of a venture capital model.
Yeah.
Today, you have a family office that's highly successful. You're able to have both public, private investments.
Yeah.
In the public markets, you have taken very large positions in Tesla, Boeing, Lockheed, right? Kind of like you're describing what I would put in the category of like innovation and also
Oh, yeah,
defense,
that's what they are. That's
right? So
exactly what they are.
so you've got kind of these two buckets of innovation, and you've got defense, but
Defense is innovation.
of
The defense
course,
armies that won because of their innovation. I,
but I guess what is the surprising part, right? And I'm cheating because you and I have talked about this before, and you kind of described some of it. Is in that innovation bucket, defense is kind of a subset of it. You also have things like Tesla, which obviously has kind of taken the lead on the electric vehicle side, but you don't have exposure to Amazon, and I think you've got a very unique view of why you've chosen to not take a position in Amazon. So maybe talk through a little bit of the logic behind. Because I think when people hear somebody who's been successful over and over and over again, they wonder, well, what are you not bullish on?
I've lost money also.
Of course. So maybe talk a little bit about Amazon and kind of what the thesis there was to actually avoid investing.
Well, let me go backwards a little bit then, to give you some context on Amazon, and also to be a little bit more responsive to the innovation and defense industry, and Tesla as well. So, part of my thesis was how expensive innovation is in the United States. And I'm not talking about Facebook coming out with an app or Google doing some AI, because I don't mean to knock any of the people that are doing that, but that's low-hanging fruit. That's still really, Facebook training it to read memes, or so they can take out hate, whatever, or to inform robotic systems is actually simple stuff. I don't mean to be an ass about it, but it's low-hanging fruit. Innovation in the United States is extraordinarily expensive. So now going forward to Amazon, Amazon is not really solving highly complex problems. There's not really a lot of innovation. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurial myth to them that's been adopted by a lot of Wall Street, a lot of tech kids, because Amazon is doing first world propaganda. They're very good at it. And I literally mean first world propaganda. They're doing American style propaganda. So they've got a lot of embedded journalists, Biz Insider and such, that are out there. My cat just turned on the light. So their accomplishment is really seizing the opportunity for greed within our own Congress, within our own political establishment, and also fulfilling kind of an oligarch wish list. So he saw where the world was going, and he just built that for them. So he saw that in actuality, the world was no longer fragmented, right? The fragmenting had occurred in my generation, which was all the big conglomerates started spinning things off. Everything they bought in the 80s, so to speak, waste management companies and everything, they now started spinning off, and that's what Mike Milken was doing. He was giving them liquidity, spin off, and a whole bunch of that stuff. So Jeff is doing the exact opposite. He's defragmenting, and he's doing it in the form of a monopsony. But monopsony has always become monopoly. And in doing what he's doing, he's just creating absolute destruction. But that's what our power structure now demands. It's no longer just an issue of shareholder return. It's malicious.
How do you balance the idea between a company like Amazon, which has been one of the best performing stocks, and
I don't know it.
But has when you measure it from like a innovative product and revenue generation standpoint, it has been quote unquote productive. But to your point, by them being productive and successful, you're basically making the argument that they're causing destruction in the rest of the market, right? So kind of how do you balance those on like a net basis, and how do you just think of it from a mental framework standpoint?
So around, I don't even know what year I decided to not buy the stock. But I knew it was going to increase manyfold, but I didn't want to be complicit in what it was doing. While as defense industry, well, those bombs have to drop somewhere, right? And those planes are going to shoot at something. there's also so much innovation that's going on that if we don't innovate, then our opponents will drop their bombs on us because we're going to. And we need, if we're going to have a space force, we need to create the technology that can facilitate that. But so Amazon, their innovation is more into propaganda and how they've been able to kind of establish a foothold. I mean, a lot of what made them great, so to speak, was the acquisition of AWS. Those margins really started eroding when Azure came into the marketplace and sucked up a lot of shares. Um, so it's a very complex story with Amazon because Amazon is not a company, it's a country. To think about it as a company is unpersuasive. Uh, it is, my thesis that we were going from a territorial sovereignty to a functional sovereignty. And you could see that more with what Amazon is doing and what Facebook and Google is doing. So right now, people are protesting and they're rioting, right? People are doing very harmful things, but they're also doing fantastic things out there. But the destructive part of it, which is the bad part of it, is they're tearing down what is available to them. They're tearing down the merchant on the street because they cannot tear down Amazon. Amazon does not have those physical locations that they can rip down. They've got some data centers, which if they even decide to approach, they'll get shot down and you'll never hear about it on CNN. So I saw the world defragmenting and I saw the idea of sovereignty really changing over, and now people are seeing it. And in a year or two, it's not even going to be, you'll be just as happy to exchange Amazon credits as you are the American dollar for some people. If you can pay your rent in Facebook coin, F coin, or Amazon coin, and your landlord accepts it, what distinguishes the two?
And so I guess as part of that, there's a lot of people who listen who are huge believers in Bitcoin specifically, and kind of the digitization of money and all these things. How do you kind of think through the corporates entering into the currency competition, the sovereign nations digitizing their currencies, and then kind of these separation of state and money, something like a Bitcoin?
Okay, so let me go back to my own background with Bitcoin. So I was involved in a company called Kazan, which was a very early peer-to-peer, right? So there was Napster, there was LimeWire, there was Kazan. And without getting too much in depth into Kazan, I saw Hillary Rosen go on to the RIAA, the Recording Artists Institute, and I saw them use Metallica as this front, whatever. But Hillary Rosen just destroyed that industry because government cannot catch up, legislation cannot catch up with technology, so they have to destroy it. And then they have to take ownership of it, which is what's happening with Facebook now. They had to destroy. Now what they're rebuilding is, this horrible incarnation. So when Kazaa got shut down, I still am resentful. I became very anti-status, and when Bitcoin came out, I freaking loved it because we didn't have torrenting and we didn't have BitTorrenting. We had, I think it was called like eGold. We had some equivalents of that had double printing problems and a whole bunch of stuff. And then, the idea of Bitcoin comes out. And I still love it. I'm no longer an owner of any. I think I may have still some Litecoin, but I met the Zcoin guys, and the Z guys, they were introducing me to Johns Hopkins, and I owned a little bit of that. I've all cashed out. But I love it. It's just not for me. It's not my risk appetite. But it is the future that we're going to live in. So if you were to ask me how that is a part of my thesis, I would say, well, there's going to be two types of money going forward. And I think you met W. Watt, who's just off the charts, brilliant with this, and can really communicate these things better than I can. And I think we're on opposing sides in terms of what that is, but we're both on the exact same side of that's what it's going to be. She just looks for an opportunity this way, and so it's going to be poor people's money and rich people's money, essentially. Rich people's money is going to be gold, as we discussed before, buried in the backyard. Uh, and it's going to be the American dollar. And poor people's money is going to be these tertiary, secondary, and tertiary type of coins, assuming that there's going to be a Fed coin, uh, which will be a dollar for dollar swap, and you're not going to see, it, it's it's going to trade as the dollar would. So you're going to see the Fed coin very soon, I'm sure. And then whoever becomes president next will probably be a part of that. If you Trump or whoever, it doesn't matter. So it's going to be poor people's money and rich people's money. Because for an average middle class person who's middle class, whether they get paid in script, essentially, as long as they can go to the company store and use it for purchases. Now the handicap there is that you can't buy Montana, property in Montana with it. You can't buy your house in Hawaii. Will that person perhaps take it? Yeah, but when you're talking about $100 million piece of property, it's not going to be ever sticky for them. They want American dollars. They want it buried in the backyard, and they want it kept to that premium. So it's good. I mean, I cashed out. I'm still an investor in some funds that happen.
And what's interesting to me, as we've talked more and more, is you're very knowledgeable when it comes to kind of the direction that a lot of this is playing out. You understand the players in the market, but you are one of the rare people who crosses over, and you're still a very bullish person when it comes to natural commodities as well, right?
I'm bullish on America.
Of course. But I think that there's a lot of people, or at least there's a narrative that is emerging where there's a lot of people who are trying to draw a line in the sand between kind of the digital commodities, if you will, all of these new tokens and assets, and then the legacy commodities, right? So like gold versus Bitcoin is a very easy one, and you can kind of go through all of them. But you are...
It's easy to kind of on a spreadsheet, perhaps kind of have a column A and a column B, and you can be very selective about what you're going to include within those fields, but it's a reckless comparison. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so maybe talk a little bit about what you've done in the natural commodity space, and kind of what the thesis there is.
Yeah, so for full disclosure, I have physical inventory of gold. I've tried other metals, but they're heavy, and you have to, even just holding them, is expensive in itself. And it's not an issue of having an appetite for risk. It's you've got to pay for that risk. The concept of wealth has changed forevermore. We've grown up in America, and even you have, where it's always been opportunity, right? Now preserving wealth has changed considerably, because now it's not just about preserving wealth, but it requires kind of a real tactical.
And so like part of this is why I enjoy talking to you so much is like, you've just thought about many different disciplines very deeply.
Yeah.
You were telling me before we started recording that these are not just fly by night thoughts that kind of come in and out of your head, but you've been writing a lot of stuff down as well. Maybe talk to us just kind of from a high level of like, why are you spending so much time right now in kind of the midst of all this chaos, writing so much in kind of like a daily log, or really kind of just putting these ideas and thoughts down onto paper?
Yeah. So it's interesting because in 2012, when all my companies went public, I was massively depressed. I mean, just clinically off the charts depressed. And vacations didn't resolve that, and just things wouldn't resolve that, and my friends couldn't resolve that. It was just, you work 20 hours a day. It's been your entire life. And your compensation, a lot of it has been on the back end. And now, you've cashed everything. Basically in 1 year, I cashed ridiculous amounts. So I was massively depressed. So I read Seneca's on Shortness of Life. And I read his letters to Lucilius. And for me, it was like my own father speaking to me. So I learned the concept of time, right? Which is something I never thought about before, but the equity of time and how to observe time. Not just by your kids growing older and getting married, but in terms of in order for you to observe time, requires its own discipline. So I started keeping a daily log. In fact, I've got it right there. And it has everything in it. Uh, it's got what time I woke up, what time I went to sleep, how long did I stay in bed for, did I meditate, how many times did I meditate, uh, uh, did I deceive myself, did I deceive others? Because deception is a very important thing. Did I talk too much? Did I listen? You know, these are things that have to be, there has to be an awareness of it that I never realized until I wanted to find some type of a dedication. So I had already had um, an appreciation for logs, right? I kept them every day. And when COVID happened, I saw, this is another one of my theories, but I saw that the world was changing so quickly and so violently that the mind could not comprehend it. You think you can, you think you remember things from COVID, you don't. I've kept a detailed log that right now is about 10 hours a day. And I've now enlisted other people to help me out. But it is extremely detailed. And are you interested in why I did this for the COVID?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, George Soros has a theory of reflexivity, which is brilliant. And I learned about it in 2012 when I was trying to figure out my own investment kind of thesis. And I needed it. I needed a better vocabulary for it and a better way of thinking about it. And the PDF of it is adequate. It's a little bit kind of tedious, but the videos on YouTube were incredible. And what he talked about was positive and negative feedback loops. And he actually used the instance of social media and news. So he was talking about it even in the current environment about how media can and will lie to you, and the tools that it uses and why, and the behavioral sciences and how it can be observed or not be observed, and how to look at it as a disembodied intellect. So that's what I wanted to do, because I knew that we were seeing the fastest roll up of power in human history. The mind can only hold actively about 6 thoughts at a time. And what the media does is they can continually will bombard you with information. They'll completely bombard you with thoughts, so that these thoughts are all you have in the front of your mind, right? That's all you've got. So all that matters is that they overwhelm those thoughts. It doesn't matter if yesterday's thought was a lie, because it doesn't exist there anymore. Today's thoughts exist there. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
So I wanted to observe COVID. I saw some of your podcasts of 3 months ago. Some of your guests were persuaded by it. I never was. And I tried to share that with people on Twitter, actually, because I never was, and I just couldn't find a few people that were sympathetic to fight that battle. So I kept a log because people weren't, and I wanted to observe the way the media was creating this, because it's no longer this Noam Chomsky type of effect with manufacturing consent. I mean, that is primitive. You're talking about Mesolithic. I mean, here you're talking about where there's only 5 media corporations, and there's only essentially 3 pipe providers like Google or Verizon or whatever it is, however it gets through the pipes. And there's only a couple of ESPNs and Disney's, and that in fact is a media corporation. So how those 5 corporations were just bullshitting everybody. They wanted to lock everybody up. And then why they wanted to lock everybody up. And I was just watching everything. And I'll give you an example of that. A month ago, everything that you were seeing on TV was images of the Great Recession and the Great Depression. And they showed long lines and food banks. Let me tell you, I do a lot with philanthropy. And I do a lot with workforce development. It's what my wife is doing right now, actually. A lot. I don't mean a little bit. I don't mean to embellish it. A lot. Well, my wife is particular. She doesn't watch TV. There you go. She's not on social media. I mean, she's actually helping people. So I knew that the job market was still good, and that actually people still freaking loved America, right? They weren't persuaded by this. They knew that media was lying to them. So I kept a log of all of it. I kept a log of chloroquine. I kept a log of Tom Hanks. Do you know anything about Tom Hanks?
Well, I know that he was one of the first celebrities to actually be confirmed to have coronavirus, and he's so loved that I think people really were kind of like, "Whoa, shit! This might be actually something to pay attention to if Tom Hanks has it."
Okay, so let me interrogate you a little bit because I'm fascinated by this. Was he confirmed to have COVID?
So him, and I believe it's Rita
Yeah.
is his wife, right? They supposedly both were confirmed to have COVID, and they were, I want to say, in Australia, but don't hold me to that. They were somewhere and took a test and were confirmed, and then basically, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, whatever, came out and said, "Hey, we've survived this,"
Okay.
which again is. To your point, I think when a celebrity or somebody who is well known, it was like the NBA players, right? Oh my God, NBA players have tested positive. From a mathematical standpoint, there should be no difference in gravity of importance based on what you do in life, how much money you have, or anything like that. When it comes from a qualitative standpoint, the fact that, a rich person or a famous person could get this, I think drives more fear when it comes to something like a virus or things that are just well not understood scientifically.
Okay. So I'm going to interrogate you a little bit. I just want to understand kind of your emotions attached to it. Not what
Okay.
it's emotional of, but just kind of how your brain kind of synthesizes what's no longer a headline anymore. So I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions.
All right.
Was he confirmed to have it? I mean, did you? I know he revealed that he had it. There was his doctor's report. I mean, wasn't disclosed. I mean, we don't see a stamp on it. How do you think he got COVID? How do you think he got it?
I have no clue.
Okay. Okay. Is it because he has a lot of exposure to people and he does a lot of selfies? Because that was kind of the common thinking at that time.
It's definitely possible, right? If I remember correctly, I think that there were stories saying that he was like filming a movie or preparing to film a movie, and the whole logic was, oh, that's because he's running into people all day long and kind of engaging that way.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they ever came out and said, hey, this is how he got it.
Yeah. So who do you think has more exposure, would have more exposure to COVID? A retail worker, hospitality worker, or Tom Hanks? Who do you think has more exposure to people, more interactions with people? Tom Hanks, the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the world, called Tom Hanks, or a retail worker making $15 an hour behind a cash register or a hospitality. Who has more exposure?
I'll tell you that throughout the entire thing, every time I went to the grocery store, the cashier at the grocery store, I was in amazement at the same people there every single day, day in, day out, because they had to interact with, hundreds of people, if not more, on a daily basis throughout this entire thing for weeks on end.
But they didn't have it. Okay, but so let me ask you another. What month do you think? What month did Tom Hanks reveal he had tested positive for COVID?
I don't remember, but I think end of March, sometime in there, if I remember correctly.
And then you discussed the NBA. When did the NBA reveal that one of their players had tested positive and had to stop the season?
Yeah, it was early. It was like mid to late March.
Okay, so it was the NBA first and then Tom Hanks, right?
I don't remember, but yeah, it's something like that.
But you remember that both of them, that Tom Hanks had COVID, and you remember that the NBA had a player with COVID. You remember both of those, but not the facts of it, right?
Of course.
That's your fact, right?
Yep.
That's what still is in your mind someplace, and it's just been filed away. It's not something you talk about every day. COVID started, right? The awareness of COVID as pandemic doesn't really have a real definition, but the awareness of the fullness of the threat of COVID started about when? When do you think?
I think in the U.S., no one really took it seriously till March, but I think globally, I remember I got on a flight in January. It was like third week of January, maybe, and I put a mask on. And I was actually just telling someone recently that the warning sign I should have paid attention to, but didn't understand that it was a warning sign, is when I went to get a mask in New York City. They were out of all the N95 masks at the store.
Okay, so now that was prophylactic of you and wise. And I know, I saw your interview with Balaji, and I know that he was a very early advocate of the prophylactic measure. So let me just understand the sequence of events, right? January, you became aware of it, and you said this is going to be a problem. And some of your friends who are better observers of these things, although not academically qualified, but enough on the periphery of being qualified to just make this type of a comment, make this type of information. And what information do you think they were getting? Just off, I mean, were they getting it from videos? Do you think that those videos of people dropping dead in China, that
Yeah.
was all of a sudden, do you think that had an influence on people's perception of the death? I mean, you remember those videos too, right?
Oh, I think that and this will be a problem going forward, but specifically was very obvious during the COVID stuff was I remember multiple times, January, February, into March and April, saying, look, the data that we are being told, you have to question for, let's say, 3 or 4 different perspectives. And the questioning isn't, I think that it's overinflated or underinflated. It's actually, I don't know, right? Because you can actually make an argument that certain data points are overinflated, certain data points are underinflated. But what ends up happening is it became this, I don't know, just emotional thing where people began to tell themselves stories that they wanted to hear, and they found the data that supported that story.
Okay,
Right.
so
And that worked for people in both camps, those for or against it.
so let me provide a little bit of forensics that is absolutely correct. So I'm going to strip the emotions out of it. I'm going to look at it as that disembodied intellect. Right?
Okay.
So I'm going to look at how true actually corresponds to fact and vice versa. And not these 6 thoughts that were in my head then and trying to invoke them now. So the videos of China were coming out in January, and of people dropping dead on social media. Okay, and the way they were quarantining people also started coming out then, and the violence of how they were doing it, which was also around the same time as the riots, which I'm sure you remember also. And because I'm familiar with China and kind of the internals of China, particularly socially, although I don't intrude in it, but I'm very aware of them. I know that there were a lot of riots on the mainland that you didn't see because people weren't getting paid, and because there was a shortage on the dollar, and there was a scarcity of the dollar, and a whole bunch of. There was a lot of riots as creditors could no longer have the capital to continue giving it to debtors because they all had their own dollar denominated credit. So December, January, and I have a timeline to the T of everything. I mean, China, the U.S., the media, the WHO, I can't even tell you how much I've got everything chronicled. So I'm going to bore you with this, but it's kind of interesting. I like kind of interrogating people about this. So the panic began. De Blasio, who's a friend, I've been with for 20 years. So I'm not going to look at him as a person. I'm going to look at the politician. In early March, said everyone go see a movie, right? And he even recommended a movie, The Traitor, which was clearly intended to be a snipe. And at the same time, his health commissioner said, hang out with everybody, have a good time, convene in large place. And Pelosi was saying the same thing. And, they were saying that they were doing it to be anti-racist or whatever, and they called it essentially its consequences, the equivalent of the flu. They didn't call it the flu, but they just the inference was that, shiz happens, right? So just go out and enjoy life. So March 11th, Imperial Report comes out, right? Neil Ferguson, who has a very checkered past. And March 11th, well, it came out right before that, but let me just begin with March 11th, is Angela Merkel comes out with this speech. It shocked the world. Literally, look up the headlines. It shocked the world. Look up the Guardian, look up anything. And she said something, and I don't have it in front of me, but my recollection was like 200 million people in America were going to become infected, if that was correct. And 2.2 million Americans would die, right? Unless certain measures were taken, but it's going to be devastating. And she called it a war on. She said, Germany hasn't experienced something like this since World War II. Freaking insane. Whatever she says, do the opposite, okay? Truly. And as an investor, I can tell you, whatever she says, do the opposite, and you'll make a fool. So March 11th, Angela Merkel comes out with that speech. Was it March 11th or March 12th? As I recall, I'm just going to say March 11th. I could be off between. It was all over the newspapers everywhere. It was even the cover of The Intercept, which is allegedly this liberal type of thing, just because sometimes they'll criticize Hillary, but whatever. Or sometimes they'll defend Trump or whatever. But I canceled my subscription anyway. But it was their cover. Millions of people were going to die, blah, blah, blah. But so on that same day, Tom Hanks announced he had coronavirus. I think in Australia, there were like, at that time, and again, I don't have this right in front of me, but there was like 4 people with coronavirus in all of Australia. Him and Rita were 2 of them. It's insane. That same day, the NBA went through what they, made their, revelation. So I believe it was within that 24-hour. And again, this is all chronicled within this, and I have a rigid time. It's incredible. So, and the NBA is ESPN and Disney, so it's a well-recognized brand, right? Around the world, everybody knows what the NBA is. So that's a lot of media exposure all at once, right? I mean, that kind of bombards your head, right? So with that said, the next time we heard of Hanks was when in April, and I forget the date. I think it was May 24th. No, it was April 24th or whatever it was. I was just looking at it yesterday. I think it was April 24th. You remember all the headlines against chloroquine, right? And it was a very heavy concentration. It was about a 2-week period. And it was everywhere. Would you agree with that? So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So going back to my theories of things, it was filling up those 6 thoughts, right? Rita Wilson announces that she endured chloroquine, and it was horrible, and it was like one of the worst experiences she's ever had in life. She's not even sure if it did any good. So the imagery that's going on in your brain. So I'm keeping this COVID blog because all of this has to be remembered. Historians are not going to remember any of this. Journalists will never write of what we're experiencing now, and if they do, it's the tiniest sliver of it. They're never going to write a system view, and journalism is never going to recover in the way that you grew up. You grew up with a Dan Rather who at least had some appearance of impartiality and authority. That's gone. That's never coming back. So I had to be that guy. So I had already had this for my own daily log, which takes me about half an hour a day.
And it feels to me like documenting it has value. Do you think that you'll go back and read it 6 months from now, a year from now? Like what's the value in the future of doing it now?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing it right now for me, right? But I'm also including it a science fiction story. And because so much information, right? Just like those 6 thoughts that Soros was talking about in his theory, the behavioral sciences, I have a lot of those 6 thoughts in my piece. I mean, just the timeline for China is about 40 slides, timeline for the US, timeline for WHO, the story about Neil Ferguson. Each of them are very overwhelming, right? They're going to inundate those 6 thoughts. And people already have their other competing 6 thoughts, right? So I include a lot of humor because I'm actually kind of a funny guy. But at the same time, I'm writing a science fiction story. And it's done in a way that relaxes the mind. So now you've got those 6 thoughts in your mind. Mine are competing for what's CNN put in your brain, but I'm also trying to give you some relief. So you've got all these negative feedback loops. I'm trying to let your mind restore some type of an equilibrium with this really interesting, just absurd, fascinating science fiction story that is awesome. And it's not literature, it's kind of a junky beach novel.
But do you want to publish this as a book, or is this something that's just for you as a creative exercise?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't know. It's become such an obsession for me because we're just it's the fastest roll-up of power in history, and there's a lot of politics going on, and there's a lot of protests, and there's a lot of reason for that is involved in that. There's a lot of tearing down statues, and losing Butterfly McQueen and just losing everything that made my life so special. I mean, just everything that made my life so special is not is not being done by the victims of the oppressor, right? Uh, it's being done by the oppressor. And once that history is gone, America will never be able to restore itself because these little idiots in like Seattle doing these things, you know, they know memes of socialism and there's some weblog that they read and whatever else that are just idiotic. I mean, I've read it's unrecognizable,
Mhm.
unrecognizable to anything that's politically coherent. So they have no intellectual ability, nor the historical record needed to build any type of an operable, what I call a people operating system. So what instead happens is we have these mega corporations that again have gone from kind of a territorial sovereignty to a functional one, where we've exchanged the constitution for terms of service. And so Facebook is taking over, Google is taking over, Amazon is taking over. Whatever was left, whatever artifacts was left of retail stores and of cash transactions and everything else is being taken away. And I wanted to document this. So I might turn it into a movie. I don't know. Uh, I don't know.
I love it. Before I wrap up, I always ask the same two questions to everyone. First one is, what is the most important book you've ever read?
Oh, that's easy. Oh, actually, it's a choice now between. I'm going to actually say Seneca Letters to a Slave because uh, I didn't have those lessons growing up. I didn't have them, and that was how I acquired all that wisdom and fatherly advice. And it's also stuck with me because of the rhetoric. You know, it was such an amazing rhetorician. Have you read it?
I have not. No.
Oh,
Worth it?
yeah, yeah. And I would say one of the other authors within that vein is Epictetus. Have you ever read Epictetus?
I have not.
Tell every young person you know to read Seneca
Hmm.
uh, without needing to adopt Stoicism, right? But just read this and read Epictetus because if somebody as a youth had given me Epictetus, my life would have been, my corporate life would have been much different because the world was so violent back then. It was about how to stay alive in very violent times. So in a corporate environment, although you're not going to be killed, if you want to succeed, it requires that same type of diplomacy and awareness and how to communicate things and how to respect hierarchies and organizational charts. Just remarkable lessons because back then, you know, Caesar would kill you on a whim or a senator would kill you on a whim, literally on a whim. If they wanted your property and you weren't in their favor, they would kill you. And they had their own militias. So it was difficult to stay alive. And it required effort to stay alive. So I would say, so those two. Okay, I'm
I,
a long-winded answer. I apologize.
I love it. What you could ask me one question to wrap up. What's the one question you have?
Can I ask you two questions?
Sure.
What is your favorite book? What book? No, excuse me. Let me take that book. What book do you feel has had uh, the most influence in you as you read it and affected you and has sustained you?
So I'm cheating because I've thought a lot about this. Obviously, when I asked the question, there was three books that I read simultaneously, or I'm sorry, sequentially, at the age of 20 years old while I was deployed to Iraq. So I had a lot of time to kind of sit around, read, think, all that kind of stuff. And I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Richest Man in Babylon, and Think and Grow Rich. And the reason why I think those three books kind of together at that time in life was it changed the way I thought, right? It kind of was a reprogramming, if you will, just about here is how work and money and kind of all these things in life that's very opposite, I think, to kind of the traditional education. And so if you read it too early, you're almost not mature enough to kind of take it seriously. If I would have read it too late in life, I probably would have kind of been set in my ways. And so it was one of these kind of serendipitous things of those three books together at that point in life, like set me in probably a different direction than I would have gone. So I think that's probably it, not even close compared to anything else.
That's very interesting. Now, particularly Think and Grow Rich, did this give you a perspective and a rationale, not just a perspective, but a complete kind of system of thought, right? So that's what it is, that you feel you lacked? Did your parents give that to you? I mean, had you had any slivers of that before? Did you have any system view of that before?
I think that my parents definitely never like sat me or my brothers down and were like, let us teach you something. The one thing that now being older, having the kind of wherewithal to have the conversation with my parents about like, hey, why did you do certain things when we were growing up? My father was adamant about not giving us an allowance. And I remember, us as kids being like, hey, every kid I know's got an allowance. Like basically you're cheating us out of our God-given right to, have $20 to go to the movies. Right.
Yeah,
And what he would say to us is, if you want money, I'm happy to give you money, but come ask me and I will tell you what you need to do in order to earn the money. And so for us, it was just, dad being an asshole basically. Right. And trying to give us be difficult. But really what he was teaching us was, look, if you want $20 to go to the movie theater, go outside and rake the leaves. Right. And kind of just instilling in us this almost subconscious manner of like, if you do work, you can earn money. And so I think that like after reading those books, it was one of these things where like you started to connect some dots that maybe weren't as obvious beforehand. And then after the fact, being able to have the conversation and him being like, yeah, like, look, I know you guys thought I was just being difficult, but like I put a little bit of thought into it. Right. I wasn't